Welcome to this deep dive into one of the darkest and most unsettling tales in American history. Well, here it is. The morning mist clings to the ridges of the Appalachian Mountains like a veil of secrets, thick and impenetrable in the valleys of eastern Kentucky. It is late April in 1911, and the dogwood trees have just begun to bloom along the muddy roads that wind through coal country. In the small mining town of Harlan Hollow, wooden houses perch precariously on hillsides, their weathered facades testament to the harsh winters and harder lives of the families who inhabit them. Smoke rises from a dozen chimneys, mixing with the fog to create a gray shroud over the community that has gathered this Sunday morning. Sarah Mae Hutchins stands at the window of her small bedroom, clutching her infant daughter against her chest. The baby, barely 3 months old, makes soft cooing sounds that seem impossibly innocent in the tense atmosphere of the house. Sarah Mae is 22 years old, though her face shows the wear of someone much older. Her hands, raw and reddened from constant work, tremble slightly as she adjusts the white christening gown she has spent weeks sewing by candlelight. The fabric is simple cotton, but every stitch has been placed with painstaking care, each tiny button sewn with thread she bartered for at the company store. The sound of her husband's heavy boots on the wooden floor below makes her stomach tighten. Thomas Hutchins has been awake since before dawn, pacing the length of their modest home with the restless energy of a man carrying an unbearable weight. He works in the coal mines 6 days a week, descending into darkness before sunrise and emerging after sunset, his face perpetually marked with black dust that no amount of scrubbing can fully remove. Today, he has washed more thoroughly than usual, his hair slicked back with water, his one good shirt buttoned to the collar despite the spring warmth beginning to creep through the mountain air. Sarah Mae knows what troubles him. It troubles her too, though she has pushed the knowledge down so deep inside herself that some mornings she can almost pretend it does not exist. But today is the baptism, and today the new pastor will see the child for the first time. Pastor William Morrison arrived in Harlan Hollow just 6 weeks ago, sent by the Methodist Episcopal Church South to minister to the coal mining families scattered throughout these remote mountains. He is young, perhaps 30, and came from Richmond with ideas about salvation and redemption that seem almost foreign in this place where survival is the primary occupation of every soul. The previous pastor, Reverend Abernathy, had been elderly and half-blind, his sermons delivered in a trembling voice that barely carried to the back pews of the small clapboard church. He had baptized babies without really looking at them, his gnarled hands shaking as he performed the sacred ritual. But Reverend Abernathy passed away in February, his heart giving out during a particularly brutal cold snap, and the church remained empty for nearly 2 months until Pastor Morrison made the difficult journey up the mountain roads. Sarah Mae had hoped they could wait, perhaps travel to the next county where no one knew their family, but Thomas insisted the baby be baptized in their own church, among their own people. He said it with such conviction that Sarah Mae wondered if he truly believed it, or if he was trying to convince himself that everything was as it should be. The baby girl, whom they named Rebecca after Sarah Mae's grandmother, has her mother's dark hair and pale skin, but there is something about her eyes that makes Sarah Mae's breath catch every time she looks at her daughter. They are unusually light, almost gray-green, and they seem to observe the world with an intensity that is unsettling in one so young. The walk to church takes 20 minutes along a path worn smooth by generations of feet. The Hutchins family joins a stream of other families making their way down from various hollows and hillsides. The men walk with the particular gait of miners, their bodies already bearing the marks of their profession despite many being in their 20s and 30s. The women clutch prayer books and manage children who dart between the adults like small, energetic spirits. Everyone is dressed in their Sunday best, which in this community means clothing that has been mended countless times but is nevertheless clean and pressed with care. The church sits at the intersection of 2 dirt roads, a simple white structure with a steeple that rises toward the sky like a pointing finger. Its paint is peeling in places, revealing the gray wood beneath, and the steps leading to the front door sag slightly in the middle from years of use. Inside, the sanctuary is plain but tidy, with rows of rough-hewn pews and windows that let in streams of morning light. The air smells of old hymnals and wood polish, mixed with the faint scent of coal dust that seems to permeate everything in this valley. Pastor Morrison stands at the front of the church, greeting parishioners as they enter. He is tall and lean, with dark hair combed neatly to one side and eyes that are a striking shade of blue. His face is kind but serious, marked by a strong jaw and high cheekbones that give him an almost aristocratic appearance despite his simple black suit. There is something about his bearing that speaks of education and refinement, yet he shakes hands with the coal miners with genuine warmth, inquiring about their families and their work with what seems like sincere interest. Sarah May feels her heart begin to race as they approach the church entrance. Thomas has Rebecca in his arms, holding her with the awkward care of a man unaccustomed to infants. The baby is sleeping, her tiny fists curled against her cheeks, her breathing soft and even. They join the line of families waiting to greet the pastor, and Sarah May focuses on keeping her expression neutral, pleasant, unremarkable. When they reach Pastor Morrison, Thomas extends his hand. The pastor's handshake is firm, his smile genuine as he welcomes them. Then his eyes move to the baby in Thomas's arms, and Sarah May watches his face carefully. She sees him lean in slightly, looking at Rebecca with the natural curiosity any pastor might show toward a child about to be baptized. His expression is gentle, appreciative, and he reaches out one finger to lightly touch the baby's hand. Rebecca's fingers curl around his in that instinctive infant grip, and Pastor Morrison's smile widens. But then something changes. It is subtle, almost imperceptible, but Sarah May sees it. The pastor's eyes focus more intently on Rebecca's face, moving from her features to Thomas's face, and then, almost involuntarily, to Sarah May's. The moment stretches out like taffy being pulled, thin and precarious. Pastor Morrison's smile remains fixed, but something behind his eyes shifts. It is recognition, or perhaps realization, and Sarah May feels the blood drain from her face. The pastor recovers quickly, complimenting them on their beautiful daughter and assuring them that the baptism will be a blessed event. But as they move past him into the church, Sarah May can feel his gaze following them, and she knows with terrible certainty that he has seen something. She does not dare look back, does not dare meet Thomas's eyes, does not dare do anything except move forward into the pew where her family always sits, 3 rows from the front on the left side. The service begins with the singing of hymns, the congregation's voices rising in rough harmony that fills the small church with sound. Sarah May knows these songs by heart, has sung them since childhood, but today the words stick in her throat. She mouths them silently, holding Rebecca against her shoulder, feeling the baby's warmth through the layers of clothing. Thomas sits rigidly beside her, his jaw clenched, his hands gripping the edge of the pew so tightly that his knuckles turn white. Pastor Morrison delivers his sermon with passion and conviction, speaking about the power of confession and the burden of secrets. His voice carries through the church with surprising strength, and his words seem chosen specifically to pierce hearts and consciences. He talks about how communities are built on truth and trust, how the withholding of truth is itself a form of theft, stealing from others the ability to make informed choices about their own lives. Sarah May feels each word like a physical blow, and she wonders if the pastor is speaking generally or if his sermon has been crafted specifically for this morning, for this congregation, for this moment. The baptism is scheduled to take place after the sermon, and as Pastor Morrison concludes his message and calls forward the families with children to be baptized, Sarah May's legs feel unsteady. There are 3 other babies being baptized today, and the Hutchins family is last. Sarah May watches as the pastor performs the sacred ritual for each child, his hands gentle and sure as he anoints their foreheads with water, his voice clear as he speaks the traditional words of blessing. Finally, it is Rebecca's turn. Thomas carries her forward, and Sarah May follows, acutely aware of every eye in the congregation upon them. They reach the front of the church where a simple wooden font holds the baptismal water. Pastor Morrison gestures for Thomas to hand him the baby, and as Rebecca passes from her father's arms to the pastor's, she wakes. Her eyes open, those unusual gray-green eyes, and she looks directly at Pastor Morrison's face. The church is silent except for the creaking of pews as people shift to get a better view. Pastor Morrison holds Rebecca with practiced ease, supporting her head with one hand while reaching for the water with the other. But before he begins the baptism, he pauses. His eyes move from Rebecca's face to Thomas's face with deliberate slowness. Then they move to Sarah May, and in that gaze, she sees not condemnation but a terrible, knowing sadness. The moment stretches impossibly long. The congregation seems to hold its collective breath. Pastor Morrison looks back down at Rebecca, and something in his expression softens. He proceeds with the baptism, his voice steady as he speaks the words that welcome this child into the Christian faith. He anoints her forehead with water, making the sign of the cross, pronouncing her name clearly for all to hear. Rebecca does not cry, but continues to stare at him with those penetrating eyes, and when the ritual is complete, Pastor Morrison holds her for just a moment longer than necessary before returning her to Thomas's arms. As the Hutchins family returns to their pew, Sarah May can hear the whispers starting, soft and sibilant like wind through dry leaves. She keeps her eyes forward, her spine straight, refusing to acknowledge the looks and murmurs. Thomas's face has gone pale beneath his tan, and his hands shake slightly as he settles Rebecca back into Sarah May's arms. The service concludes with a final hymn and a benediction, but Sarah May barely hears any of it. Her mind is racing, calculating, remembering, and dreading what comes next. The custom in Harlan Hollow is for families to gather outside the church after services, standing in small groups to discuss the week's events, to share news, to reinforce the social bonds that hold this isolated community together. Sarah May wants nothing more than to hurry home, to retreat to the safety of their small house where she can pretend that everything is normal. But Thomas, with a stubbornness she has come to know well, insists they stay. He positions them near the church steps, nodding to neighbors, accepting congratulations on Rebecca's baptism with a forced smile that does not reach his eyes. Pastor Morrison emerges from the church last, having changed from his baptismal robes back into his simple black suit. He moves through the crowd with ease, stopping to speak with various parishioners, but Sarah May can feel his attention circling back to them repeatedly. Finally, inevitably, he makes his way to where they stand. The conversation that follows is superficially pleasant. Pastor Morrison asks about the Hutchins family, about their home, about Thomas's work in the mines. He speaks with genuine interest about the challenges of coal mining, the dangers these men face daily, the courage it takes to descend into darkness knowing the risks. Thomas responds with short, clipped answers, his usual reticence amplified by his obvious discomfort. Sarah May contributes even less, focusing her attention on Rebecca, who has fallen back asleep in her arms. But beneath the surface pleasantries, there is something else happening. Pastor Morrison's eyes return again and again to Rebecca's face, studying her features with an intensity that cannot be mistaken for casual interest. He comments on how beautiful she is, how alert she seemed during the baptism, how unusual her eyes are. Each observation feels loaded with meaning, and Sarah May can feel Thomas tensing beside her with every word. Finally, Pastor Morrison mentions that he would like to visit the Hutchins home during the week, to check on the new family, to offer any spiritual guidance they might need. It is a customary practice for pastors in these mountain communities, but the way he says it makes it clear that this will not be an ordinary social call. Thomas has no choice but to agree, and they settle on Wednesday afternoon, when Thomas will be finished with his shift in the mines. The walk home is silent and tense. The spring afternoon has grown warm, and wildflowers bloom along the path in bursts of color that seem mockingly cheerful. Sarah May adjusts Rebecca in her arms multiple times, though the baby is light and causes her no physical discomfort. The weight she carries is entirely different, and it grows heavier with each step toward home. Once inside their house, Thomas finally speaks. His voice is low and controlled, but Sarah May can hear the anger underneath it, anger mixed with pain and confusion. He asks her directly what she thinks the pastor saw, what he suspects, whether their secret has been discovered. Sarah May wants to lie, wants to deny, wants to pretend that everything is fine, but she cannot. The truth has been hovering between them since Rebecca's birth, growing more substantial and undeniable with each passing day. She admits what they both already know. Rebecca does not look like Thomas. She does not look like Sarah May either, not really. She looks like someone else entirely, someone whose presence in their lives was supposed to be temporary and forgotten. Thomas sinks into a chair at their small kitchen table, his head in his hands, and Sarah May sees his shoulders shake. She wants to go to him, to offer comfort, but she knows her touch would not be welcome right now. The story that led to this moment is not simple, though the basic facts are stark and unchangeable. 2 years ago, Before Sarah May and Thomas were married, she worked as a domestic servant in the home of a wealthy family in Lexington. She had gone there seeking better opportunities than what the mountains could offer, hoping to save money and perhaps attend a secretarial school. The family she worked for was well established, with connections throughout Kentucky society. Their eldest son, Edmund, was home from university for the summer, and he noticed Sarah May immediately. What happened between them was not violent, but neither was it entirely consensual in the way that word is usually understood. Edmund was charming and attentive, making Sarah May feel seen and valued in a way she had never experienced before. He spoke to her about literature and music, shared his books with her, and treated her with a courtesy that seemed genuine. When he began seeking her out more frequently, when his attentions became more intimate, Sarah May was too inexperienced and too flattered to understand the inherent imbalance of power between them. The affair lasted only a few weeks before Edmund's mother discovered them together. Sarah May was dismissed immediately without references, given barely enough money for train fare back to the mountains, and warned never to speak of what had happened. She was told in no uncertain terms that any attempt to contact Edmund or his family would be met with consequences that would destroy not only her reputation but her family's standing in whatever community they lived in. Sarah May returned to Harlan Hollow in shame and silence, carrying a secret that would have ruined her if anyone had known. She reconnected with Thomas, whom she had known since childhood, and when he proposed marriage 3 months later, she accepted gratefully. Thomas was kind and steady, a hard worker with a good reputation in the community. She convinced herself that she could build a good life with him, that the past could stay buried in Lexington where it belonged. They married in a simple ceremony with Reverend Abernathy presiding, and Sarah May believed she had escaped the consequences of her mistakes. But when she discovered she was pregnant 4 months into the marriage, a cold dread settled in her stomach. The timing was wrong. Thomas believed the baby was his, conceived on their wedding night or shortly after, but Sarah May knew better. She had known from the moment she missed her first monthly cycle, before she even returned to Harlan Hollow, that she was carrying Edmund's child. She had hoped desperately that the baby would look like her, or somehow like Thomas, that genetics would be merciful and hide the truth. But from the moment Rebecca was born, Sarah May saw Edmund's features in her daughter's face. The shape of her eyes, the set of her chin, the unusual color of her irises, these were not Hutchins' family traits, nor were they features from Sarah May's side. They belonged to Edmund's lineage, to the refined features of a wealthy Lexington family who would never acknowledge this child's existence. Thomas, in his heart, knows the truth as well. He has known since Rebecca's birth, though he has never said it aloud until today. He counted the months, did the arithmetic, noticed the features that matched neither his family nor Sarah May's. But he loved Sarah May, and he wanted to believe in the possibility of their family, so he pushed his doubts aside and focused on being a good father to the child who bore his name even if she did not carry his blood. But now Pastor Morrison has seen what Thomas tried so hard to ignore. And if the pastor has seen it, how long before others in the community begin to notice as well? How long before the whispers that started outside the church today grow into open speculation and eventual condemnation? In a place like Harlan Hollow, where everyone knows everyone else's business and moral failings are discussed with the same fervor as Scripture, this kind of scandal could destroy them completely. The days between Sunday and Wednesday pass with excruciating slowness. Thomas goes to the mines each morning before dawn, and when he returns in the evening, he is withdrawn and silent. He no longer reaches for Rebecca when he comes home, no longer asks to hold her while Sarah May prepares their meager supper. The distance between husband and wife grows with each passing hour, a chasm that words seem powerless to bridge. Sarah May spends her days caring for Rebecca and maintaining their home, tasks that usually provide structure and purpose but now feel hollow and meaningless. She washes clothes in the wooden tub behind the house, hangs them to dry on lines stretched between trees, tends to the small vegetable garden that provides much of their food. But her mind is elsewhere, constantly circling back to the upcoming visit from Pastor Morrison, trying to anticipate what he will say, how he will approach the subject, what consequences might follow. On Tuesday evening, Sarah May sits by lamplight mending one of Thomas's work shirts. The fabric is worn thin in places, and she knows it cannot last much longer, but they do not have money for new clothes. Rebecca sleeps in a cradle that Thomas built before her birth, when he still believed she was truly his daughter, when their future seemed full of promise despite the hardships of life in coal country. The baby's breathing is soft and rhythmic, and Sarah May pauses in her sewing to watch her daughter's face in the flickering lamplight. She allows herself to wonder, just for a moment, what life would have been like if things had been different. If Edmund had loved her, if his family had accepted her, if Rebecca could have grown up with the advantages of wealth and education. But the fantasy feels bitter rather than sweet, because Sarah May knows that Edmund never loved her. She was a diversion, an amusement, something to occupy his summer before he returned to university and eventually married someone from his own social class. He probably barely remembers her now, while she will carry the consequences of their brief affair for the rest of her life. Wednesday arrives with gray skies that threaten rain. Thomas comes home from the mines earlier than usual, washing thoroughly at the pump outside before entering the house. He changes into clean clothes and sits at the kitchen table, waiting. Sarah May has cleaned the house meticulously, though it is always tidy. She has baked cornbread using precious ingredients, preparing for the pastor's visit with the hospitality that is expected even in the most difficult circumstances. Pastor Morrison arrives at 3 o'clock precisely, knocking gently on the door frame before entering when Thomas calls for him to come in. He removes his hat and accepts the chair that Sarah May offers, declining the cornbread but accepting a cup of water from their well. Rebecca is awake and alert in Sarah May's arms, and the pastor's eyes go to her immediately. The conversation that follows is the most difficult of Sarah May's life. Pastor Morrison does not accuse or condemn. Instead, he speaks with a gentleness that somehow makes everything worse. He talks about the importance of truth in a community of faith, about how secrets can poison relationships and prevent genuine healing. He acknowledges the difficulty of mountain life, the pressures that drive people to make choices they might not otherwise make, the grace that is available even in the most complicated situations. Then, speaking carefully and watching their faces, he says that he could not help but notice certain features in Rebecca that seemed unusual for a child of their family. He asks, with painful directness, whether there is anything they would like to share with him, any burden they have been carrying that might be lightened through confession and prayer. The silence that follows his question is absolute. Sarah May can hear her own heartbeat, can hear the ticking of the mantel clock that was a wedding gift from Thomas's parents, can hear the distant sound of children playing somewhere down the hollow. She looks at Thomas, seeking guidance, permission, or perhaps just connection, but his face is turned away from her. Finally, Sarah May begins to speak. The words come haltingly at first, then faster, tumbling out in a rush of confession that has been building for months. She tells Pastor Morrison everything about her time in Lexington, about Edmund and his family, about her dismissal and return home, about the pregnancy she discovered too late, about the lie she has lived since Rebecca's birth. She does not make excuses or attempt to justify her actions. She simply tells the truth, and with each word, she feels something inside her breaking and simultaneously being released. Thomas listens without speaking, his face a mask of pain and anger and something that might be relief. When Sarah May finishes, Pastor Morrison sits in silence for a long moment, his hands folded in his lap, his expression thoughtful and sad. What Pastor Morrison says next surprises both Sarah May and Thomas. He does not speak of sin and punishment, does not threaten exposure or excommunication. Instead, he talks about the difference between judgment and accountability, about how communities can either crush people under the weight of their mistakes or help them carry those burdens toward redemption. He acknowledges that what Sarah May did was wrong, that the deception she has maintained is serious, but he also recognizes the impossible situation she faced as a young woman alone and exploited by someone with power over her. He asks Thomas directly how he feels about what has been revealed. Thomas's response is raw and honest. He says that he has suspected the truth for months, that seeing it confirmed brings both devastation and odd relief. He admits that he loves Sarah May, that he has built his life around the idea of their family, but that he does not know if he can continue living with this lie. He looks at Rebecca, and his face contorts with conflicting emotions. He says he has tried to love her as his own daughter, but every time he looks at her, he sees the man who came before him, the man Sarah May gave herself to, the man whose child she carries instead of his. Pastor Morrison lets Thomas speak without interruption, and when the words finally stop, he asks a question that cuts to the heart of the matter. He asks Thomas whether he believes Rebecca deserves to suffer for the choices that adults made before she was even born. He asks whether an innocent child should be punished for circumstances entirely beyond her control. He reminds Thomas that in the eyes of God and the law, Rebecca is his daughter, that he has claimed her as such, and that this claim carries responsibilities that cannot be easily set aside. The pastor then turns his attention back to Sarah May. He asks her what she wants, not what she thinks she deserves, but what she truly wants for her future and for Rebecca's future. Sarah May's answer comes from somewhere deep within her, a truth she has been afraid to acknowledge even to herself. She says she wants to stay in Harlan Hollow, wants to remain married to Thomas, wants to raise Rebecca in the community where she herself was raised. She says she knows she does not deserve these things, knows she has built her life on deception, but that she cannot imagine any other path forward. Pastor Morrison nods slowly, then explains that he has a proposition. He suggests that the three of them enter into a covenant of sorts, an agreement that will govern how they move forward. The terms are these: Sarah May and Thomas must commit to absolute honesty with each other from this point forward, no matter how difficult the truth might be. They must attend counseling sessions with Pastor Morrison, working through their pain and anger and betrayal in a structured way that gives them the best chance of rebuilding their marriage. And they must both commit to raising Rebecca together as full and equal parents, setting aside the question of her biological paternity in favor of the family they have chosen to create. In exchange, Pastor Morrison promises that he will not reveal what he has learned to the broader community. He will not speak of it from the pulpit, will not share it in confidence with church elders or community leaders, will not allow it to become fodder for gossip and judgment. He acknowledges that some people may suspect, may notice the same things he noticed, but he will neither confirm nor deny their suspicions. He makes clear, however, that this protection is conditional upon their sincere effort to work through their problems and build a genuine family for Rebecca's sake. The weight of this offer settles over the small house like a blanket. Thomas and Sarah may look at each other across the kitchen table, really look at each other for the first time in days. In Thomas's eyes, Sarah May sees hurt and anger, but also love and a desperate kind of hope. In her own heart, she feels something cracking open, a space where honesty might finally have room to breathe. They agree to Pastor Morrison's terms. The covenant is sealed not with signatures or formal documents, but with a prayer that the three of them share, holding hands around the table while Rebecca sleeps peacefully in her cradle, unaware of the adult drama swirling around her infant life. The counseling sessions begin the following week. Every Saturday afternoon, while other families are fishing in mountain streams or working in their gardens, Sarah May and Thomas make their way to the small room behind the church that Pastor Morrison uses as his office. The sessions are difficult and often painful. Under the pastor's gentle but persistent questioning, they are forced to confront truths they have been avoiding, to speak aloud fears and resentments that have been festering in silence. Thomas talks about feeling betrayed, not just by Sarah May's deception but by his own inability to protect what he thought was his family. He speaks about the humiliation of raising another man's child, especially a man of higher social standing whose name he does not even know. He admits that sometimes when he looks at Rebecca, he feels nothing but anger, and this admission brings him to tears because he knows it is not the baby's fault, knows she is innocent, but cannot always control how he feels. Sarah May, in turn, speaks about her own shame and guilt, about how the choices she made in Lexington have poisoned everything good in her life. She talks about her fear that she will never be able to make amends for her deception, that Thomas will eventually decide he cannot continue living with her, that Rebecca will grow up without a father because of her mother's mistakes. She admits that some part of her resents Rebecca as well, because the baby is a constant reminder of her own weakness and the consequences that followed. Pastor Morrison listens to all of it without judgment, guiding them toward honest expression rather than accusation, helping them separate their emotions from their commitments, teaching them that love is not just a feeling but a choice that must be made repeatedly, especially when feelings falter. He assigns them homework between sessions, small acts of service they must perform for each other, conversations they must have, moments of physical affection they must initiate even when they do not feel like it. Slowly, incrementally, something begins to shift. Thomas starts holding Rebecca again, first reluctantly, then with increasing confidence. Sarah May notices when he comes home from the mines and immediately washes up to hold the baby before supper, notices when he starts talking to her in the soft voice fathers use with their children, notices when he begins to smile at Rebecca's gurgles and grasps. She does not comment on these changes, does not draw attention to them, but she feels a tight knot in her chest begin to loosen slightly. Meanwhile, the community of Harlan Hollow continues around them with its usual rhythms and dramas. Spring gives way to early summer, and the mountains burst into full green glory. The mines continue to consume men's lives and health, offering wages that keep families barely above starvation while enriching distant owners who never set foot in these hollows. Women gather to can vegetables and share recipes and commiserate about the challenges of mountain living. Children run wild through the woods, learning the land their ancestors have inhabited for generations. There are whispers about the Hutchins family, of course. Mrs. Peterson, whose house sits adjacent to the church, mentions to several neighbors that she has noticed the pastor making regular visits to the Hutchins home. Mrs. Carroll, whose husband works alongside Thomas in the mines, comments that Thomas seems different lately, quieter and more withdrawn than usual. Miss Henderson, the schoolteacher, remarks that baby Rebecca is unusually beautiful, with features that seem almost aristocratic compared to her parents' rougher mountain heritage. But Pastor Morrison keeps his word, and the whispers never coalesce into certainty. When directly asked about his visits to the Hutchins family, he mentions that he is providing spiritual counseling to many families in the community, which is true if incomplete. He preaches sermons about grace and forgiveness, about the danger of gossip and the importance of minding one's own affairs, about how every family carries private struggles that outsiders cannot fully understand. One evening in mid-June, Sarah May and Thomas sit on the porch of their small house, watching the sun set behind the mountain ridges. Rebecca is 6 months old now, and she has grown into an alert, curious baby who smiles readily and reaches for everything within her grasp. Thomas holds her on his lap, letting her grab at his fingers with surprising strength. Sarah May rocks slowly in the chair that belonged to Thomas's grandmother, feeling the warm evening air on her skin. They have been silent for some time when Thomas speaks. He says something that has clearly been building in his mind for weeks. He says that he has decided to think of Rebecca as his daughter in truth, not just in name. He says that biology matters less than he thought it did, that what makes someone a father is the daily choice to show up, to provide, to protect, to love. He says he cannot promise that doubts will not resurface, that difficult moments will not come, but that he chooses to be Rebecca's father regardless of who provided the blood in her veins. Sarah May's eyes fill with tears, and she reaches across the space between their chairs to take Thomas's free hand. She tells him that she does not deserve his forgiveness, does not deserve his choice to stay, does not deserve the grace he is offering. Thomas squeezes her hand and says that maybe none of them deserve the grace they receive, that maybe that is the whole point of grace, that it is given not because it is earned but because it is needed. This moment does not solve everything. Their marriage still carries scars, their trust still needs rebuilding, their future still contains uncertainties. But it represents a turning point, a decision to move forward together rather than allowing the past to determine their destiny. As darkness settles over the mountains and the first stars appear in the deepening sky, the small family sits together in tentative peace, bound by something more complicated than blood but no less real. The remainder of 1911 passes with the changing seasons bringing their own challenges and small victories. Summer heat settles into the hollows, making the work in the mines even more brutal than usual. Thomas comes home each evening drenched in sweat and coal dust, his body aching from hours of hard labor in the oppressive underground darkness. But now when he arrives home, he seeks out Rebecca immediately, taking her from Sarah May's arms despite his exhaustion, talking to her about his day as if she can understand every word. Sarah May continues her work maintaining their household, a task that requires constant effort in a place where conveniences are few and hardships are many. She tends their garden with increasing skill, learning which vegetables thrive in the mountain soil and which seasons are best for planting different crops. The food they grow supplements Thomas's wages and reduces their dependence on the company store, which charges prices that keep most mining families perpetually in debt. The Saturday counseling sessions with Pastor Morrison continue throughout the summer and into fall. The conversations become less painful over time, less focused on excavating wounds and more directed toward building new patterns of communication and trust. Pastor Morrison teaches them practical skills for managing conflict, for expressing needs without accusation, for listening with genuine openness rather than defensive resistance. He assigns them readings from Scripture and from other sources, asking them to reflect on concepts like forgiveness, redemption, and the possibility of new beginnings. In September, Sarah May discovers she is pregnant again. The realization brings a complex mix of emotions: joy at the prospect of giving Thomas a child who is biologically his, fear that Rebecca will be treated differently once there is a baby who shares Thomas's blood, hope that this pregnancy represents a new chapter for their family. She tells Thomas one evening after Rebecca has fallen asleep, watching his face carefully for his reaction, that Thomas's response exceeds her expectations. His face lights up with genuine happiness, and he pulls Sarah May into an embrace that lasts long moments. He talks excitedly about how Rebecca will be a big sister, about how they will need to build another cradle, about how their family is growing. He does not make distinctions between children who are his by blood and children who are his by choice, and Sarah May feels the last remnants of her fear beginning to dissolve. The pregnancy progresses normally, and Sarah May continues her daily tasks even as her belly grows. The women of Harlan Hollow rally around her with the kind of practical support that characterizes mountain communities. Mrs. Peterson, despite her earlier suspicions, brings over preserved foods and offers advice about managing 2 young children. Mrs. Carroll teaches Sarah May how to sew larger clothes from smaller ones, maximizing the use of every scrap of fabric. Even Miss Henderson stops by occasionally, bringing books she thinks Sarah May might enjoy and offering to watch Rebecca while Sarah May rests. Pastor Morrison performs another baptism in the spring of 1912, this time for the Hutchins family's second daughter, whom they name Margaret after Thomas's mother. The ceremony is simpler than Rebecca's baptism had been, but no less meaningful. This time, when Pastor Morrison holds the baby and looks at her parents, there is only warmth and approval in his gaze. He has watched this family rebuild itself through months of difficult work, and the evidence of their success is visible in the way Thomas holds both daughters with equal affection, in the way Sarah May's face has lost some of its drawn anxiety, in the way they stand together as a united family unit. The years that follow bring their share of hardships. The coal mining industry continues to extract its terrible price from the men of Harlan Hollow. Thomas suffers a minor accident in the mines that leaves him with a permanent limp and occasional pain in his left leg. Sarah May endures a miscarriage between their second and third children, a loss that grieves them both deeply but which they face together rather than allowing it to drive them apart. The national economy fluctuates, affecting coal prices and therefore the stability of Thomas's employment. But through all these challenges, the family that Sarah May and Thomas have chosen to build remains intact. Rebecca grows into a bright, curious child who loves reading and asks endless questions about everything she observes. By the time she is 5 years old, her unusual eye color and refined features have become simply part of who she is rather than evidence of any scandal. The community has either forgotten their earlier suspicions or chosen to set them aside in favor of accepting the Hutchins family as they present themselves. Margaret and the subsequent children who join the family are raised alongside Rebecca with no distinctions drawn based on biology. Thomas treats all his children with equal affection and attention, and if he occasionally looks at Rebecca and wonders about the man whose blood she carries, he keeps those thoughts private and does not allow them to affect his behavior toward his eldest daughter. Sarah May never attempts to contact Edmund or his family. She does not try to inform them about Rebecca's existence, does not seek financial support or acknowledgement, does not harbor fantasies about some future reunion. She has made her choice to build a life in Harlan Hollow with Thomas, and she protects that choice fiercely. The past remains in the past, a closed chapter that shaped her but does not define her. Pastor Morrison remains in Harlan Hollow for 7 more years, becoming a beloved figure in the community. His sermons continue to emphasize grace over judgment, mercy over condemnation, and the power of communities to help individuals carry burdens that would crush them if borne alone. He never reveals what he learned about the Hutchins family that day in their small kitchen, keeping his promise with unwavering integrity. When he is eventually transferred to another parish in 1918, the entire community gathers to bid him farewell, and the Hutchins family is among those who thank him most sincerely for his service. By the time Rebecca turns 10 years old in 1921, the world has changed dramatically. The First World War has come and gone, bringing death and disruption even to remote mountain communities. The coal industry has grown more mechanized and more dangerous, with larger companies consolidating control over smaller operations. But some things remain constant. The mountains still stand eternal and majestic, the rhythms of rural life continue largely unchanged, and families still gather for church on Sunday mornings. On one such Sunday, Sarah May sits in her usual pew with Thomas beside her and their 5 children arranged along the bench. Rebecca, now old enough to help with her younger siblings, has Margaret on her lap and is keeping 3-year-old James from squirming too much during the sermon. Sarah May looks at her eldest daughter, sees the intelligence in her unusual gray-green eyes, sees the grace in her movements that speaks of heritage Sarah May can never acknowledge, sees the patience and kindness that are entirely Rebecca's own regardless of genetics. Thomas reaches over and takes Sarah May's hand, a gesture that has become natural again after years of rebuilding trust and intimacy. She squeezes his hand in return, feeling the calluses from his work in the mines, the strength that has carried their family through countless difficulties, the steadiness that has been her anchor when she might otherwise have been swept away by the currents of consequence and regret. The new pastor, Reverend Walsh, is delivering a sermon about the parable of the prodigal son, about a father's willingness to welcome home a wayward child despite the pain that child caused. Sarah May listens to the familiar story with new understanding, recognizing elements of her own experience in the narrative of sin and redemption, judgment and grace, alienation and restoration. She thinks about how she ran away from Harlan Hollow seeking something better, how she returned bearing the consequences of her choices, how Thomas welcomed her back and helped her rebuild a life worth living. After the service, the community gathers outside the church as always. The Hutchins family mingles with neighbors and friends, accepting compliments on how quickly their children are growing, discussing the price of coal and the prospects for the coming harvest season, participating in the social fabric that binds this isolated community together. Rebecca stands with Miss Henderson, who has remained unmarried but deeply involved in the education and well-being of Harlan Hollow's children. The teacher is explaining something to Rebecca about arithmetic, and the girl listens with rapt attention, her intelligence evident in her focused expression. Mrs. Peterson approaches Sarah May with a smile, holding her newest grandchild. She makes a comment about how lovely Rebecca has become, how she carries herself with unusual poise for a mountain girl. Sarah May accepts the compliment graciously, without anxiety or defensiveness. The observation that once would have felt like accusation now seems simply truthful. Rebecca is lovely. She does carry herself with poise, and these qualities are something to celebrate rather than fear. As the afternoon wears on and families begin dispersing to their homes, Sarah May finds herself alone for a moment, standing in the churchyard and looking out over the valley below. From this vantage point, she can see the scattered houses of Harlan Hollow, the narrow roads that connect them, the mountains rising on all sides like protective walls. It is a hard place to live, demanding everything from its inhabitants and offering little in return except the fierce pride of survival and the deep bonds of community. But it is home, and Sarah May has earned her place here through years of honest work, painful confession, and patient rebuilding. The mistakes of her youth will always be part of her story, but they do not have to be the final chapter. She has learned that redemption is not a single moment but a process, that grace must be accepted daily, that the hardest work often happens in small, unremarkable moments rather than dramatic gestures. Thomas calls to her from where he is loading their children into their wagon, and Sarah May turns to join her family. Rebecca has James on her hip, keeping him entertained while Margaret and the younger children climb aboard. Thomas offers Sarah May his hand to help her up, his face showing the wear of a decade of hard labor but also a contentment that was absent in the early years of their marriage. As they ride home together, the wagon bouncing along the rough road, Sarah May reflects on the journey that brought them to this moment. She thinks about that Sunday morning in 1911 when Pastor Morrison first held Rebecca and saw the truth that would change everything. She thinks about the fear and shame that nearly destroyed her marriage and her family. She thinks about the courage it took to confess, the grace it took to forgive, the commitment it took to rebuild. Most of all, she thinks about the children surrounding her now, chattering and laughing, secure in the knowledge that they are loved and wanted and belong to a family that chose to fight for itself rather than surrender to despair. Rebecca, the child whose birth exposed secrets and forced terrible reckonings, sits beside her with a contentment that speaks to the success of all the difficult work that came after. Whatever uncertainty shadowed her arrival has been replaced by the certainty of a father's love and a mother's determination to protect the family they built together. The sun is setting as they arrive home, casting long shadows across the hollow and painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Thomas unhitches the wagon while Sarah May gets the children inside to prepare for supper. The evening meal is simple but sufficient, and they eat together at the table Thomas built with his own hands, in the house they maintain through shared labor, surrounded by children they are raising together despite the complicated circumstances that brought them all to this place. After supper, after the children are washed and put to bed, after the day's tasks are finally complete, Sarah May and Thomas sit together on their porch once more. The night air is cool and pleasant, filled with the sounds of insects and the distant murmur of the creek that runs through the hollow. They do not speak much, having learned that silence between them can be companionable rather than tense, that not every moment requires words. Rebecca appears briefly in the doorway, asking for a drink of water before bed. Thomas gets up to fetch it for her, and Sarah May watches the interaction between father and daughter. She sees genuine affection in both their faces, sees the bond that has formed through years of daily choices to love rather than reject, to include rather than exclude, to build rather than destroy. When Rebecca returns to bed and Thomas settles back into his chair, Sarah May speaks the thought that has been forming in her mind throughout the day. She says that they have been given a gift, though it came wrapped in difficulty and pain. She says that the crisis that Pastor Morrison's observation precipitated could have destroyed them but instead forced them to become more honest, more intentional, more committed to each other and to their family. She says she would not wish to repeat those difficult months, but neither would she trade away what they learned and who they became through that trial. Thomas considers her words in his characteristic thoughtful way, then agrees. He adds that Rebecca herself is a gift, that her existence forced him to confront his own capacity for grace and to choose love over bitterness. He says he cannot imagine their family without her, cannot conceive of his life taking any path other than the one they walked together through those difficult years and into their present relative peace. They sit together as full darkness falls, as stars emerge one by one in the clear mountain sky, as the sounds of the hollow settle into night rhythms. Inside the house, their children sleep safely. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges. Thomas will descend into the mines again, Sarah May will resume her endless domestic labors, the children will grow and change and require new kinds of attention and care. But tonight, in this moment, there is simply peace and the knowledge that they have survived and even thrived despite circumstances that might have broken them. The story of how Pastor Morrison's gaze revealed the truth about Rebecca's paternity has become a defining moment in their lives, but not in the way Sarah May once feared. Instead of bringing shame and destruction, that revelation became the catalyst for transformation. The crisis forced authenticity, the confrontation enabled healing, and the threat of exposure ultimately brought them closer together rather than tearing them apart. Years later, when Rebecca is grown and married with children of her own, when Sarah May is gray-haired and Thomas is retired from the mines due to his declining health, they will occasionally reflect on those early years. They will remember the terror and the pain, but they will remember even more clearly the grace that carried them through, the community that supported them despite suspicions and gossip, and the pastor who chose to protect rather than expose, to guide rather than condemn. The mountains of eastern Kentucky will continue standing long after their story ends, witnessing generation after generation of families struggling with similar dilemmas, making their own choices between grace and judgment, truth and comfortable deception, loyalty and betrayal. The small church in Harlan Hollow will continue gathering believers every Sunday, offering a place where sins can be confessed and forgiveness can be found, where broken relationships can begin the slow work of repair, and the story of the Hutchins family will become one among many stories of survival and redemption in these ancient mountains. A testament to the possibility that even the most damaging secrets can be transformed into sources of strength when faced with courage and honesty. The baby whose unusual eyes revealed her mother's transgression will grow into a woman who never knows the full story of her origins but who always knows without question that she was loved and wanted by both her parents, that she belonged to the family that raised her regardless of biological connections, that the most important truths are the ones we choose to live by rather than the ones we inherit through blood. Sarah May and Thomas's choice to fight for their marriage, to accept the consequences of past mistakes while refusing to be defined solely by those mistakes, creates a legacy that extends far beyond their individual lives. Their children will carry forward the lessons learned in that small house on the hillside, lessons about grace and forgiveness, about the difference between truth that destroys and truth that heals, about the power of commitment to transcend the limitations of circumstance. On this particular evening in 1921, however, Sarah May and Thomas are not thinking about legacy or lessons. They are simply grateful to have survived, to have found their way back to each other, to have built something worth protecting despite the odds against them. They are grateful for Pastor Morrison's wisdom in handling their crisis with discretion and compassion, grateful for a community that eventually chose to overlook its suspicions in favor of accepting the family as they presented themselves, grateful for each other's willingness to do the hard work of rebuilding trust and intimacy after betrayal. As they finally rise from their chairs and prepare to retire for the night, as they check once more on their sleeping children and extinguish the lamps. As they lie down together in the darkness of their small bedroom, they carry with them the knowledge that tomorrow will come with its own demands and difficulties. But they also carry the knowledge that they have faced worse and survived, that their love has been tested and has proven resilient, that the family they have built together is strong enough to weather whatever storms may come. The story that began with a pastor's observant gaze in 1911 has become a story of redemption, resilience, and the transformative power of choosing grace over judgment. It is a story unique to the Hutchins family but also universal in its themes of human weakness and strength, of mistakes and their consequences, of the possibility of new beginnings even after the most devastating revelations. And it is a story that will continue unfolding in the lives of Rebecca and her siblings, in the grandchildren yet to be born, in the ongoing testimony of a family that refused to surrender to shame and instead chose the harder but more redemptive path of truth, forgiveness, and love. To uncover more stories that reveal the hidden secrets and forgotten mysteries of the past, leave a like if this deep investigation kept you hooked until the end. I invite you to subscribe to the channel. Did you know that 80% of people who watch aren't subscribed and end up missing incredible stories? It costs nothing. Oh, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from and share other dark tales that, in your opinion, deserve to be explored here on the channel. See you soon.